National Guardsmen forced U.S. citizens to vote at gunpoint in order to break a labor strike, and this certificate was given out to one of those guardsmen in order to thank him for his service in committing this illegal action. And this all happened in 1919 in the small town of Carneyville, Wyoming. You see, earlier that year there was a general nationwide strike of all coal miners across the country in order to protest awful labor conditions as well as their wages. And in October of that same year, a settlement was reached and all of those miners returned to their jobs, except in northern Wyoming, who decided they were not going to abide by the terms of that settlement. And in early November, they took a vote and decided to strike again. This prompted the governor of Wyoming, Robert Carey, to declare a state of emergency, and he called up the National Guard, having them muster at Fort D.A. Russell outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming on November 3rd. And on November 26th, those National Guard troops surrounded the local pool hall in Carneyville, where most of those miners were hanging out. They then conducted a house-to-house search, dragging any miner who wasn't currently there over to the pool hall so they could have them re-vote on the strike at gunpoint with the National Guard in attendance. And predictably, the miners, afraid for their lives, decided to vote to rescind that strike and continue working in the mines. The very next day, the Secretary of War, what we would know today as the Secretary of Defense, declared the act completely inconceivable and saying it was a clear violation of the Posse Comitatus Act that restricts the U.S. military from being used to enforce domestic actions. And despite the governor of Wyoming being roundly criticized in the national press, the rescinding of that strike did stick and those miners did return to work. Now, it's evidence throughout this scrapbook that this private was just a normal guy who played in a traveling band, so how was he comfortable committing such a heinous act? And the reasoning behind why he was able to do this is right here in the scrapbook, where right underneath it, it's captioned, "To protect the coal mines." Because despite being a Union member himself, as evidenced by his Union card that's in the same exact scrapbook, Private Draper obviously felt that following the orders of his commanding officer, the governor of the state of Wyoming, justified this action without really putting a lot of thought into it, and it's a really good example of how good people can do bad things given the proper rhetoric and motivation.